Though classic games like Half-Life 2 and Bully were released many years ago, fans are still clamouring for sequels that are, more than likely, never going to see the light of day. But every now and then your Kingdom Hearts 3s and Metroid Prime 4s come to fruition, and in just a few days, the first of many of these eagerly anticipated sequels will be hitting store shelves. The game in question is Red Dead Redemption 2, but before its release day arrives, let's take a look at just how high the series' standards were set by its classic original. God damn it! Yeah, I kind of forgot about Revolver, but it's not really a well-known classic, nor is it important to the plot of Redemption, so it doesn't really matter that I skipped over it. Besides, the game that I'm actually reviewing is where the series became a much acclaimed Rockstar property, and given my love for some of the studio's other games, this one's been on my backlog for quite a while. And now that I've finally experienced it for myself, do I agree with all the praise it received? Well, let's find out. Taking place at the beginning of the 20th century, Red Dead Redemption puts you in the boots of John Marston, a former outlaw who is thrust back into the world of the Wild West when he is taken from his family and forced by the government to hunt down his former gang members and to bring them to justice. But after things don't quite go to plan, Marston finds himself readapting to life in Western America, and although he still has his eyes set on his primary objective, he'll embark on many different adventures with many different characters along the way. So like Bully, the end goal is more of a backdrop for plenty of mini-stories that all take place in the same world. They're mostly simple little Western adventures, but it's not the events that carry the plot forward, it's the characters that partake in them that do. There's a massive ensemble of different faces that John Marston interacts with throughout the game, but every single one stands out and are all memorable in their own way. They range from likeable to interesting or enjoyably kooky in typical Rockstar fashion, and the banter they share with John whilst horse riding to the objective keeps the missions consistently fresh. Speaking of whom, I found John Marston to be a really interesting main character. He's not only a likeable presence to journey with, but gradually learning more about his past over the course of the game kept me engaged with his crusade. It's a good thing that it does, because even though I really enjoyed the story and the characters, the main bulk of the plot, which is still a prevalent part of the experience, has a few wrinkles. The opening hour or so is a little jarring. We're given little context as to what's what, and with dramatic events unfolding almost instantly, I did find myself a little confused as to what was going on. Thankfully, things do pick up quickly after that, and I was soon really into it. And fortunately, it wasn't until the final act of the game that I encountered my other flaw with the narrative, but unfortunately, it's a big one. The worst thing any long piece of entertainment can do is look like it's about to end, when in fact there's an entire chunk left. You might still enjoy the remaining section, but it can feel exhausting anyway. Red Dead Redemption is guilty of doing this. Twice. Because of this, the last few hours dragged on, even though I wouldn't really have an issue with the length had the game been plotted differently. But when the story looks like it's about to wrap up, when in fact there's still plenty of work to be done, I did find myself sighing a couple of hours towards the end. Well, what I thought was the end anyway. But the issues aren't too detrimental to the overall experience, and even the final hours give us some more fun characters to interact with, so despite some faults here and there, I still found the plot great. Yet, of course, this is a video game, so while it is plenty of fun to watch, is it as much fun to play? Well, seeing as this is an open world game, the first thing it needs to succeed in is giving the player a memorable environment for which everything else takes place in. And I realised that from the footage on screen you might think it looks bland, and early on I wasn't too sure how memorable it would be, but it wasn't long before I realised that that was far from the case. While there's plenty of interesting locales and it's easy enough to traverse, What really makes it stand out is its beauty. I'd often find myself slowing down to fully soak in the atmosphere, and though it's a game filled with plenty of action-packed sequences, it's the quieter moments whilst just travelling across the vast landscape ahead of you alone that really stood out to me. That doesn't mean that the world is lacking character, on the contrary, it's packed with personality. I especially love these small random events like someone stealing your horse or putting a stop to a small robbery. They give the world extra life outside of objectives, and it adds an unpredictability to minor encounters, which added a lot to exploration. As for the rest of the world design, I'll admit that some key locations are visually a bit samey, and having multiple missions to choose from at one time, a la Bully, in a world this big mostly comes down to which one's easier to access, at least from my experience. But the sweeping visual lore of the landscape overcomes these issues to ensure that this map is still a great backdrop for the rest of the game's content. Speaking of said content, let's take a look at the most prominent type of gameplay, the story missions. Pretty much every single one begins with a horse ride to your destination. The dialogue keeps things interesting, and I really appreciate that when you hold down X, you'll match the speed of your accomplice. As for horse riding solo, you have a stamina gauge to keep an eye on, which makes races a bit more interesting, even if they're hard to lose anyway. When you eventually arrive at your destination, you'll more than likely wind up in a shootout. There are some sparks of variety here and there, particularly early on with these not so thrilling ranch missions, but most problems in this game will be solved with a gunshot or two. Not that I'm complaining, as the shooting is really fun. It's not a big departure from your average shooter, but it doesn't need to be, and the guns, with the exception of a slightly finicky sniper rifle, all felt satisfying to use. And then there's the dead eye feature. With a click of the right stick, you can slow down time to shoot a bunch of enemies in quick succession. Now this might seem like this would make the game too easy, but it doesn't. This is because the gunfights are quite fast-paced, and the large group of rivals that overwhelm you ensure that even when you can easily take care of a few men, battles still feel frantic and challenging. It does need to charge up as well, so you have to be somewhat careful as to when you use it, giving way to some genuinely thrilling showdowns. And even though variety isn't this game's strong point, these gunfights never got too repetitive for me, thanks to the consistent excitement they brought, as well as the fantastically executed rise in difficulty. So, despite little difference between most of the missions, they're still really enjoyable. I will confess that after I beat the main story, I didn't feel too compelled to free roam afterwards, but that doesn't mean the world doesn't have anything extra to offer, nor did I ignore these features whilst heading towards the next objective. There's tons of minigames for you to play, and I'd often give one a go whilst in one of the towns, and they're fun little additions. You can also night watch ranches and towns to pass the in-game time. I think there's collectibles for you to find, but that basically sums up what my interest in finding them is. And there's quite a few side missions as well. Gameplay-wise, they're not really any different to the main missions, so I did find myself mostly ignoring these. With the exception of one. After what looked to be the final mission, the game puts you back in the open world without a credits roll and a sign of what to do next. I wandered around for a bit, unsure as to whether or not I'd actually finished the story, but without any real clue as to what I should be doing, I did a quick search to find out that the real ending of the game is a side mission. Ignoring the fact I would never have worked that out on my own, it's very underwhelming having this big epic essentially culminate in an optional mission that doesn't even conclude things narratively in a satisfying way. The game doesn't even send you back to the title screen after the credits, you carry on from the exact same spot. It leaves the player with no definitive sense of closure, making for a rather disappointing anticlimax. But despite all the flaws I've mentioned throughout this review, the stuff this game does well more than outweighs the issues, leaving us with a really great open world game that I had a crap ton of fun with. It didn't quite strike a chord with me in the same way that Bully and LA Noire did, mainly thanks to its few lulls, but it does come close in many places. So in the end, I'll score Red Dead Redemption 89%. If the sequel can match the terrific characters, exciting action, and the unexpected beauty of its predecessor, then we're in for another great journey across the Wild West.